Dzień dobry Państwu, z tej strony Błażej Hrabkowicz. To kolejna rozmowa online podczas trzeciej edycji Octopus Film Festival. Dzisiaj łączymy się z Australią, gdzie jest reżyserka filmu pokazywanego w konkursie głównym, filmu Relict, Natalie Erika James. Hello Natalie.
Hey, thanks for having me.
We're glad you're here with us, if only via video link. But we all know the circumstances. You've just told me before our, live broadcast that you're in Melbourne in lockdown, so it would be quite difficult to get you here.
Yes, unfortunately.
Yeah.
As much as I'd love to be there, yes.
Yeah, but your film is here, Relic, in a main competition, and of course, for me, this film is like a fair ride, or the candy shop, because I love horror films. I'm a big horror genre fan, and I always felt that if you want to talk about our basic, most profound human fears or social fears or fears from different spheres of human life, the horror genre is a perfect language to talk about it. And from your film, I gathered that you have a similar approach.
Yes, certainly. I think, horror is an incredible genre to talk about fear, and I think using the genre as a vehicle to talk about, really real issues is, just a space that I'm really interested in. And, the ability to kind of externalize those fears, to craft your story and to kind of use surreal imagery is, something that really appeals to me.
Yeah,
really.
So horror imagery and surreal imagery are, in your opinion and in your films, sort of a language to get something what's psychological, real, and in my view, sometimes in horrors it works better than in psychological drama, because it intensifies those fears and it makes them overwhelming, which they really are sometimes in real life.
Yeah, definitely. I think for me, my aim was to capture the essence of the experience of, someone you love going through Alzheimer's and slowly becoming someone else, even though they might look the same for a while. And to capture that uncanny feeling, I felt like, having real supernatural terrors was the way that I wanted to do that.
Were there any particular horror films or horror traditions that influenced you as a filmmaker, influenced your imagination, and you just always have these films or these directors in the back of your head when you're thinking about your approach to the genre? Yeah.
The first film I saw without parental supervision in a cinema was The Others. In 2001, and I just remember loving the feeling. I mean, the mix of the drama and the horror, but also going together with friends and getting really scared and going on this roller coaster ride of it. And then from there, I watched a lot of Asian horror in my teens as well. So I think you can probably see that I'm drawing on a lot of Asian horror traditions. One of them is often that the menace is someone to feel compassion for. In Japanese, particularly, the ghost or the menace has been a wronged woman, for example. So there's a real sense of empathy towards them, and it's not so black and white. So that's certainly something. I was also really a big fan of Gothic horror literature. And, in Gothic horror, it's all about restraint and this idea that it could be something in real life or it could be something supernatural. So those are the kind of influences that drove a lot of the work. If I think about films, maybe I always really love the balance of emotion and horror in a film like The Orphanage by Jay Bayona.
Yeah, this is a great film. I also like it.
Yeah, and also in terms of the structure and the pacing, I would always reference Ben Wheatley's Kill List, because that's a film that has a lot of tension and, it's a slow burn until the end when it kind of goes off. So those were influences for me.
Yeah, these are very interesting influences, especially when you're talking about this tension. Because what I found really interesting in your film, in Relic, is that there is a very specific way in which you build tension in the film and then relieve it, but never
Right.
actually relieve it till successfully. Like you hold this tension,
Right.
you relive it a bit, and then you hold it. But there are some scenes in your film which I know we all know from sort of the subgenre of horror, like haunted house horrors. There are these scenes in your film which are draw upon things that I know and we know as a horror audience. But you always manage to find some unconventional way to deal with it, unconventional way to end these scenes, and I really liked that, and I'm interested in asking you. Did you have a very some kind of particular approach to the way you built tension in the film? What did you try to achieve here with, this structure and pacing you mentioned?
Yeah, I mean, I guess what was forefront was to be true to the character journeys and to not succumb to I think there's a thing these days with some horror films that are made where you have to hit, a scare every 10 minutes or whatever it is. And it can be driven by algorithms as well, based on the streamers too. So we were really trying to resist that and make sure that the scares, when they do come, feel earned by the story and what's happening to the characters. So in some ways, yeah, their relationships are kind of tied up in the way that tension is escalating. And it's not so much like, oh, there's been a gap, let's have a scare here. It's more, a building on a feeling of unease that eventually has to blow off and go the way that it does at the end and unravel. But I think in terms of approach, I mean, I'm just trying to think what, I don't know if I have anything particular to speak to, but hopefully that answers your question somewhat.
Mm-hmm. But if also watching your film, one cannot help but think that you have a strong interest in family dynamic and family affairs. And there are, of course, a lot of horror films that deal with that. Somehow, the family, which is supposed to be our sort of beacon of hope, of support, is
Safety.
really sometimes very dark structure and is of interest, of great interest to horror filmmakers. So, what was your idea here, with depicting this family dynamic?
Yeah, I guess probably it was rooted in my own experience, and not that it was completely true to what had happened in my life, but my own grandmother had Alzheimer's, and a lot of the inspiration came from watching my mother's relationship with her mother change over time. And I was really interested in the idea of, when children have to start parenting their parents, essentially, and those kind of roles are shifting. And it can be a really tricky space emotionally for both sides, and especially with people who are growing older and can't necessarily take care of themselves. There's a real resistance to that sometimes as well, and it can get very complex and fraught. Particularly if you've got these simmering resentments anyway, or there's incredible feelings of guilt that come along with it. So I think, my thinking was to really explore those things that I'd observed in my own family readily. And, even the granddaughter character, she has this kind of naive sense of taking on what her mother can't. And that's kind of, it bites her, back in the end. So, I think it's interesting observing people at different stages in their life and how those things become cyclical, right? We have to, confronting your grandparents' mortality makes you think about your parents and your own by extension. So I think that's a scary kind of thought on a lot of levels that feeds into horror quite well.
Yeah, also you mentioned guilt, and I also I think that the language of horror genre is also great for for talking about these kind of emotions, the guilt, the traumas, and
Right.
it's really visible in your film that there is a guilt that permeates this story, and the characters, maybe especially the Emily Mortimer character,
Yeah.
the mother. So. Is this guilt something you also very particularly observed in your family, or maybe in yourself?
Yeah, yeah, that's pretty accurate. I started writing the script on a trip I took to Japan to see my grandmother, and it was a trip that I had put off for whatever reason. And by the time I went to see her, she couldn't remember who I was. And so I think that feeling of regret about not having to go, seeing her more regularly or made the effort. I think we're all guilty of not seeing our, parents or calling our grandparents often enough. So it feels like a pretty relatable thing, but it's definitely something that I, experienced a lot. So the writing of this has been really, helpful in processing those feelings, I suppose.
Yeah, I understand that very well because I remember when my aunt died. She was also very old, but a couple of months before her death, I was considering visiting her because I haven't seen her in a while, and unfortunately I didn't make it.
Yeah.
Before, and that of course gets you this feeling of guilt that you have to process. So yeah, I understand that
Yeah.
completely. I think we all do, basically. But coming back to the question of tension, which I asked earlier, to maybe just rephrase it and to pinpoint what I was interested in, because there is a lot of ways to build tension in horror film. Like you can build it in a scene, and then relieve it completely, and then get to the next scene like 15 minutes later and build it once again and relieve it. Or we can be interested more in holding this tension like throughout the film and make it like sort of like waves, so to speak.
Yeah.
So that's interesting me as from a director's point of view. What was your thinking here for this story? What would be best for this story?
Well, I think a lot of tension also has to do with what is withheld, and what is revealed. And I guess the way that we try to, one of the things in, holding that tension and not going for the conventional scares, and ending the scenes in that different way that you mentioned, had to do with the fact that, we wanted Edna to be inscrutable to a certain degree, in that there's all these things that point to, there's a lot of misleads about, is it an intruder? Is it someone coming into the house? Is it, is she possessed? All those things. So that was something that we really wanted to hold on to until the end, when the characters have gone through enough in their relationships that they can see her for what she really is and also accept her. So that was kind of what was driving the way that we structured the story.
Suggestion of possession and the theme of possession in horror is very interesting because, of course, in many horrors, even if it's supernatural, even if this demon that possesses the character is otherworldly, it almost also speaks to something from within us. And for me, I always felt that every one of us is at some point of our life possessed with something, and that is why the possession is such a strong theme in horror movies. And I'm interested in you. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, certainly. I think, one of the things that was interesting about Relic from a horror perspective is that we tried to, obviously we're mimicking the way that Alzheimer's and dementia ravages, a person's brain and, their physical decline. And so we drew a lot of our inspiration from what actually happens physically, as well as, in the emotional space of the character. But at the same time, if you think about Alzheimer's as a character, it's like, what does it want? Because you have to think about that. Even if it's a demon or whatever, a demon wants to drag someone down to hell, or it wants to, whatever it is, corrupt people. So for Alzheimer's, we had to just think its only drive is to destroy. and to deteriorate everything in its presence. And so a lot of what's scary in the film is more Edna's deterioration and the way that the Alzheimer's makes her lash out and be aggressive and be, inappropriate. But at the end of the day, when you see how vulnerable and how human she is, even though it's taken to like a very supernatural extreme, it's very true to like how people are at the end of their lives. And then you can't help but feel that compassion. So I guess it's quite different to like a binary view of the world where you're, it's a evil versus good. It's not that, it's more elemental, and it's not something that can be like vanquished. It's not like you can get rid of the evil thing as you do see in most horror films. Yeah,
this is the fact that you can't get rid of it is
right.
Because in your film it stems from the fact that it's really you speak about in the film you speak about inevitable things, because there is this phrase which comes back in your film, it's here, it's coming here.
Right.
And you just mentioned it in reference to Alzheimer's, but and of course when I was watching the film I was thinking about Alzheimer's, but I have to tell you that basically I was mostly thinking of death, that what's coming is really death, and it's inevitable. So this is the passing of time and the passing of life seemed to me as the most profound and basic theme of your film.
Yeah, no, certainly. It's obviously telling a story of Alzheimer's and dementia, even though the phrase is never said, but it certainly relates to death universally and just all of our declines. I have always had a fascination for Vanitas art, which obviously focuses on this inevitability of death and the ephemeral nature of our lives, and the beauty that's to be found in that. So that was really the intention with the end of the film.
But you're talking about beauty that can be found in this sort of ephemeral nature of our life, which of course I agree with. But to tell you the truth, when I was watching the ending of your film, and when I was focusing on Sam, on the youngest character, the daughter and the granddaughter, I don't think she finds beauty in that. I found that but my feeling was that she's really, really scared by this realization that her grandmother is passing, and her mother will also pass, and she will also pass. So of course there is also beauty in your film, but there is a lot of, she's basically scared, in my opinion.
Yeah, I think she is, but for me, I see it as a very hopeful, optimistic ending. You might disagree, which is totally fine, but I suppose it just speaks to what stage of your life you're in, and at least for Kay, Emily's character, there's a real sense of acceptance and a sense of I guess it's just highlighting the importance of connection in the face of death. So, and that's what, it kind of starts in this place of guilt, and that's how it ends for her, at least. But then definitely with Sam, that is a completely, cyclical kind of concept. And so she will have to go through the same kind of journey, probably.
What's optimistic in that, and I would have to agree with you there, is this connection you mentioned, because there is fear, of course, in all the characters of your film, but in the end they don't succumb to fear. They feel it, but they don't let it win, in a way, because there is a strong sense of very familial and communal goodbye, and there is a lot of tenderness in that, despite the fear. And I imagine that is what you were looking for here.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think her final, decision to turn back and go back and essentially help her mother die is like the ultimate act of love. It's a really intimate, heartbreaking kind of moment for her. So, yeah.
I also have to ask you about body horror because we were talking
Okay.
about
Yeah.
haunting house subgenre, which is of course
Yes.
evident in your
Yeah.
film because this it that Edna is speaking about is somehow haunting the house, and we know this it can be interpreted as Alzheimer's or death, but there is also an element, strong element of body horror in your film, and I always felt that body horror is a great sort of language to talk about how our emotions manifest in our bodies. And I wanted
Sure.
to ask you about your approach to body horror and why did you decide that this would be also the element which would be great
Yeah.
for this story?
Yeah, I guess I was a massive Cronenberg fan as well, and so I've always had
David Cronenberg, the ultimate master of body
yeah,
horror.
yeah. I've always had a massive love for it in general, using practical prosthetics and enhancing them with VFX. So there's a marriage there. Yeah, it's interesting. When we first wrote the script, it was the kind of final figure that you see Edna as was external to her. It was kind of like a doppelganger of death. But we decided that was better represented within her because that is kind of what happens, mimics real life more accurately. So in some ways, I mean, gosh, you never know how you come up with these things, I suppose, they develop over time, and it just, I don't have an answer other than it felt right. It's a visceral moment, and it felt viscerally right. So
I think
yeah.
it feels viscerally right because also because if we interpret your film as a film about death and the inevitability of death, and that really touches our bodies. Our bodies are in decay, in decline.
Yeah.
So this body horror language is great to enhance that, to enhance the fact that our mortality is really connected to our bodies.
Completely.
Yeah, so I'm glad I'm glad I explained that to you. This is my role as a critic. We critics
really
explain the
interesting.
films to the directors.
It's funny. Well, because if you think about how long you spend writing the thing,
Yeah.
it's like, 4 years. But you're right in that when you read reviews about your film, you almost understand. Like sometimes people will like verbalize it in a way that you, didn't have the words for. It's really interesting. So
Yeah,
thank
yeah.
you.
Of course, that was a joke, but a joke that is in reference to a very real thing. Because I always I talk with many directors. They always say that sometimes when I say to them what I'm saying to you here, they say, "Yeah, well, I didn't think of it that way, but I think you're right. I guess I felt it somehow." Yeah. So I think this is the kind of process I imagine you're talking about right now.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. So tell me, because this is your first feature film, and from what I know, it's really based on themes you explored earlier in your shorts, particularly your short Creswick seems really
Yeah.
similar in a way to what you're talking about in Relic. Is horror and is a horror genre combined with a psychological drama in a way the road you want to take, like further in your career? Is it the language that you really that you feel yourself most comfortable with, or would you try to do something else?
Yeah, I'm pretty genre. No, I would say I'm pretty drawn to stories like this that have some sort of heightened genre element. But I'm writing a few things that are all within the horror genre, but different subgenres like a demon horror. So I probably would be hard pressed to do another haunted house story. But yeah, I'm doing like a folk horror as well. I'm also really interested in grounded sci-fi too. That's something I'd love to work in. And maybe one day do some epics or something. I think that'd be pretty cool. Like
Epics?
fantasy epic.
Ah,
Yeah,
fantasy
like
epic.
epic. Or
So
like a gladiator or, something.
you're seeing yourself in Hollywood, for example?
I mean, it's definitely not in the immediate future, but potentially further down the track. We'll see.
I think it's tempting for many directors to get this big Hollywood budget and to do something
Oh,
really
right.
really grand and epic, and that people can see in IMAX and whatever. I guess that would have been pleasant for you.
No, I think it's, as for a second film, I kind of just want to build slowly and see
I mean,
how it
down the road,
goes.
of course.
Yeah, I would hate to jump to, something massive and be swallowed by the machine.
Well, then I guess I can, right now I can only wish you that even if you someday go to Hollywood and make films there, you won't be swallowed by the machine, but you will make, you will stand your ground, and you will do, even in Hollywood, you will do things that you would like to do. For now, we are eagerly, I think all of us here on Octopus Film Festival, we are eagerly awaiting your second film, because I can speak. Programmers obviously liked your film because it's the main competition, but I can also speak for myself that I really, really enjoyed it. It's very, it's profoundly touching. I think this is the greatest thing I can say about your film. The film, of course, is Relic. The director is Natalie, Erika, James. Thank you very much. Stay safe in Australia. Hope the lockdown is over soon and you can walk freely as normal people.
Thank you very much. It's great chatting.
Yeah, bye.
Cheers. Bye.